Hey YouTube, it's Coach Daniel, creator of HammerIt Tennis. In today's video, we're going to talk about something that a lot of my students, they ask me about, and other people get a lot of questions about, is stringing, the best way to string a tennis racket. So we're going to show you guys a full tutorial on how to string a tennis racket. So let's get to it. All right, so the first thing you need to do is, if you've already had your racket strung and the strings are broken, you got to cut the strings out. So depending on the age of the racket, there's a lot of people that they talk about diagonal patterns. That's good. If it's a newer frame, you probably can just get away with cutting it straight up and straight across, and that's fine. But if you want to be careful, you can do diagonally, or what I like to do is cut every other one and kind of alternate between cutting the crosses and the mains to get an even dispersion of the weight as it comes off the frame. If you have a racket that's brand new and doesn't have strings in it, then you're ready to go. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we get the racket mounted properly. And so to get the racket mounted properly, there's usually a dot up in the top of the frame there. Sometimes it's easier to see than others. This Babolat has a little dot, you can see right there by my thumb, a little circle. So that's going to indicate the center of the frame, and then you need to see how many grommets you have down at the bottom. This Babolat is a pure arrow. It's got 3 grommets down there, so you're going to line the center up with the post here. And so on this machine here, it's got the yellow post. So what we're going to do is we're going to line the center of the frame up, and so you've got to adjust your posts. So depending on your model, some of them have cranks, some of them you just like this one, you loosen it and then you pull it with your hand. So you want to pull it so it's snug, then you're going to clamp it down. Okay, so if your stringer has these side braces, make sure you go ahead and engage those. I like to do opposite sides at the same time, so that way, again, it goes on even. So I'm just going to touch right now. That one's already touching, and I'm going to pull this one in until it just touches. Now, then what I'm going to do that I have them touching is I'm going to tighten them down a little bit more. Now, I'm not going to like crunch the racket. I just want them to be, snug, because the way that these are designed is they're sloped. So if you look at them, they're angled, and as they come in tighter, it actually pushes the racket down because of the shape where it's angled down. So as it comes in, it pushes this racket down. You don't want to crunch the frame. Be very careful not to crunch the frame. You just want to just get it to it's snug and it's holding the racket down. Now that I've got it in there and it's just tight, I'm going to do something. So as we string the racket and we do the mains first, the frame's going to want to compress. These side mounts on newer machines help reduce the racket's tendency to compress and become more of a circle. So these side braces keep that from happening a lot more. Your older machines, if they're not a 6-point mount, then that can be an issue where the frame will compress and it pops out this way. It's not as bad here, but to combat that, what you want to do is once you get it onto your machine, you're going to just kind of loosen your post and give it a good pull, and then tighten it down. And when you do that, it's going to have that frame stretch just a little. Again, my side mounts are just going to be snug. I don't want them to be loose, but I don't want them to be crushing in the side of the frame, because you can make a dent in the side of the frame. So be very careful just to kind of pull it in there. All right, so now the next step, once we get the racket on the machine, is we got to get our string ready. And so today I'm going to be using some Babolat RPM Blast. So one thing I do with most of the rackets I string, it's suggested a lot of them to 2-piece. If you're using the same type, you can 1-piece. I tend to just 2-piece everything. That way I can always start my crosses on the top of the frame. So I can start up here and work my way down to the throat. that, you know, you can go by the stringer's guide, but I tend to play it safe. I also just seems to work better if I two-piece everything. I can get my last tie off mains. I feel like I can get them a little bit more consistent. That way one's not a little tighter than the other. They're both consistent. So that way I get a more consistent tension across the mains. So I'm going to two-piece this. And before I do it, if you're using a poly like this, one thing that I suggest is after you get the string straightened out, is I like to hook it on the side brace, and I'm going to walk it out until I have 2 even ends, okay? So this is how I'm going to measure this out to cut it. I just divide the set of string in half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the ends, and some of the string gets more tangled than others. So I'm going to get to the end, and I'm going to hold those together now. So that way, and then I'm going to loop the other end. I'm going to loop this other end on the side brace. I'm going to walk it out all the way to the end, and then I'm going to pull. Now what that's going to do, it's going to stretch the string just a little bit. So it's going to kind of pre-stretch the string. And then once I have that pre-stretched, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by putting the string down in the throat here, okay? So, all right, so I'm going to pre-stretch it. We're going to cut it, and we're going to start putting the string into the rack. All right, well, now that I've got the string cut, one thing that's important is before you start, you're going to want to take your clippers and just give yourself a little angle cut. That way it'll go through the grommets a little bit easier. So just nice, clean, angled cut. I'm going to take this piece and we're going to string it through the one side of the main. Doesn't matter if you do the left or the right, whichever you want to do first, but then make sure you're coming around the post with the other side. And since this is a 2-piece string job, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this even. Now, if this was a 1-piece string job, what I would do is after I put that in, I would pull the long side, I would pull the short side, I'd count my mains. So say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Say I have 8 mains. I'm going to pull 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That way I have enough to reach the stringer, the tensioner, maybe even 10, because you got plenty of string in a pack. So that's going to be your short side, and then the rest of the string will be on what they call the long side. So, but where I'm doing a 2-piece, I'm going to pull the string even. So it's going to be the same length on both sides. So again, what I like to do is just even it up here, and then now pull with my hands the string until I got it. All right, now I'm going to take one of the sides. Again, it doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to pull it through so it looks like this. Now, these clamps are pretty good. It just depends. Sometimes some people use a starting clamp. So I'm going to clamp this on the inside and lock it down. Since it is the first main, sometimes I like to use a floating clamp. So now I've got a floating clamp in here. And now I got to set my tension on my stringer. All right, as you can see on the stringer, I got the tension set at 55 pounds. I like to string my racket around 55 pounds. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this under. Now, some people will go over. I like to go underneath, especially with my tensioner on this model. It has plenty. If I go underneath, it's not hardly even going to touch the throat. I don't recommend going over at all. I see a lot of people string their rackets that way. where they pull this and then they pull it over the throat. I don't think that is a good way to do it. I would definitely go under the throat if possible, but it's pretty much always possible. So I would go under the throat. So I'm going to tension that, clamp it. All right, now I'm going to turn the racket around. We're going to go through. One thing I like to do on this first one is just give it a little bit of a push. You'll see the tension remove. So what that did was it, again, stretched the string just a little bit more, and so it gave it a little extra tension. And so it's going to help combat a little bit of the slippage. So I'm going to do a couple on the same side first. So I like to do a couple on the same side to start off. And after I do this main on this side, now I'm going to switch over here to the other side where I've got my floating clamp. Again, I'm going to go under the throat. Pop my floating clamp off, and again what I'm going to do is, you saw the tension remove a little bit, I'm going to push it and it moves a little bit more. That's going to help even out my tension. One thing to remember too as you guys are doing this, if you are just starting stringing, don't get caught up in how fast you can string a racket. Trust me, if you try to go for speed, you're going to screw up and then all of your time is wasted. So taking 10, 15, even 20 minutes longer on a job is worth it if you don't have to do the entire job over again, because then you're out all your time and potentially a pack of string. So it's better to just take your time and do it right the first time, and maybe spend a little extra time doing it than trying to race and screw something up. All right, so I'm going to keep going doing the mains, and then I'm going to speed up here and we're going to come back when I'm tying this off. All right, so one thing to make sure too is as you're stringing, make sure that you skip the appropriate grommets for the crosses through here. So if you don't know the stringing pattern, look it up. Again, you don't want to mess it up, because if you mess it up, then you've wasted all your time and potentially your string. If you can obviously tell the pattern, then a lot of times the racket will say skip or cross. It'll have it indicated. If you know the racket, then that's fine. But if you don't know it, look it up. Sometimes you think you know which one to skip and it wasn't the right one. But you want to make sure that you get the right one. All right, so as I come in to the last main here, so I've skipped 2 crosses. I'm going to try to clamp as close as possible to the grommet in the frame. Some with these braces, sometimes you can't get that tight. If you can't just get as close as you possibly can. I'm going to show you a trick here to help reduce tension loss. So make sure you get in there as tight as possible. So come down to your tie off, And I'm gonna show you a trick here, guys. If you have trouble with getting the string through, one thing you can do is, if you've got some smooth pliers, pinch the end of the string, crimp it real hard. It's gonna flatten out the string. Then, after the string's flattened out, take your clippers and cut it. What that's gonna do, it's gonna make it a super sharp point. So I flatten it out, makes it really thin, and then I cut it. So now it's almost like a needle. So now with that, it's gonna go through real easy. Now after I pull it through, especially with these polyester strings, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull it really hard. I'm gonna wrap my hand around it and I'm gonna pull. That's gonna help give me a little bit more tension back in here. Now, the knot that I like to use, most people use double hitch knots. I do not like a double hitch knot. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down on the other side. Let's zoom in on this for you guys. All right, so I don't like using a double hitch knot. I have a modified knot that I use. So the string's coming out of the hole. I'm gonna take my string and I'm gonna go down on the other side. I'm gonna pull it up and through. Now, as I pull this back, I'm not gonna pull it all the way down. I'm just gonna make a small loop still. I'm gonna take this string now. I'm gonna go down on the other side. And as I come up, I'm gonna come up and through the loop. Okay, so I'm gonna come underneath and through that loop. I'm gonna go through that loop that I just pulled. Now, before I pull that tight, I'm gonna take the bigger loop. I'm gonna pull it out. See how when I did that, it tightens that knot, and I'm gonna pull it back really hard. So I'm gonna pull it out, and I'm gonna keep working it back until I see this string over here start to tighten. So by pulling it back and in, it's gonna tighten that string and it's gonna start tightening it. Now, as I get it tightened back, now I'm gonna pull this one down and tied. So it's not quite a double hitch knot. And what's gonna happen is when I release this clamp, the knot will get tighter. So a double hitch knot doesn't get tighter. This will actually tighten on itself. So the tighter this pulls, the tighter that knot gets. And so when I pop this clamp off, that knot tightens up on itself. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of pull some of these, push down on some of these mains, and that's gonna get the tension to even out a little bit better. All right, so I'm gonna tie off the other main. So again, I'm going to crimp my string. I'm gonna get it so it's really flat. See if I can get it to get a better view for you guys here, if I can zoom in. Now I'm gonna take my clippers, I'm gonna cut that crimped part, and you can see it makes a really sharp point. All right, so now that's gonna go through without having to use an awl. I don't wanna use an awl if I don't have to. An awl will typically damage the string. I've seen people break mains and have to start over again because they broke the main using an awl trying to tie it off. So I'm gonna pull it through, give it a nice tug. I'm gonna go down, up and through, leaving a little loop. I'm gonna go down, up on the other side, and through that loop. Again, I'm gonna go through this loop right here. I'm gonna pull the first loop out to tighten my main, and then pull it back. And then I'm going to pull the other string, and that's gonna tighten it. Pop the clamp off, and then I'm done with the mains. So let's get started on the crosses. All right, so one thing that may seem pretty obvious, but I've seen a lot of different things out there, is when you're cutting off the excess here, you don't want to cut it so it sticks out past the frame, because then that's going to get caught on clothes. It could cut you. I've seen that happen. But you also don't want to cut it like right up on the knot. You know, just barely below the frame, so that way if you run your finger, it doesn't hit, but you don't want to cut it like super tight on the knot. If you're not using the knot that I showed you, a double hitch knot can come undone, and if you cut that right up on that knot, I've seen double hitch knots come undone. If you're using the knot that I showed you, that knot will not ever come undone or loosen. So this isn't going to move around very much, but still, you just don't want to cut it that close because you might accidentally cut your knot. So just cut it a little bit below the frame and you'll be good to go. All right, so we're going to get started on the crosses. Some rackets will indicate which side you're supposed to tie and start the crosses on. It really doesn't matter. You can start on either the right side or the left side. I just honestly just kind of alternate so that way it doesn't wear the grommet out, because if you use the same side every single time, then that tie off is going to that grommet's going to get huge, and sometimes the grommets will break out. So I just alternate so that way they wear a little bit evenly. So I'm going to pull the string through the grommet on the tie off hole, and I'm not going to use a ton here. I don't need a ton of string. Some people pull out, I don't need a ton. So, you know, just like 6-7 inches of string is all you're really going to need here. Now, again, what you're going to do is you're going to go down, up, and through. Now, it helps if you pull and kind of hold the rest of the string because it's loose. Now, again, I've made a little loop there, and I'm going to kind of hold this string with my other hand. Now I'm going to go down, up, and through that loop again. And so you can see I'm through that loop. Again, it's not a double hitch knot. I'm going to pull this back, and I'm going to pull that one tight. Now, what you can do too, depending on how big, if you have a problem with your grommet, you can just loop the string. So see how this knot slides out? I can loop the string back through, hold it, and then I can tie the knot with that extra string in between. And so that's going to keep that knot from pulling through. There's no way that can pull through. So if you're worried about that pulling through, that's an extra piece of string you can put in the way. And then when you tension it, it's going to tie all that down, but it's going to leave a little of a loop of it. You can, just depending on how far you put it in, it's going to leave a little loop. We don't really need that with this poly. This racket's relatively new, so there's not an issue with that going through there. So now I'm going to start the crosses right here. Now, it depends on how you want to go. Some people, it makes a big difference to them if they start this first one under or over, and then just keep it the same. Depending on how you want to do it, you can use the method where you kind of weave the main string like that, or you can just kind of go up and down. It just depends. Some strings it's easier to do different styles with. Whatever works for you. As you're pulling the crosses, always push the string down. Don't just, it'll burn. You'll burn and knot your string. Always hold it away so that way the string is pulling straight through the grommets. You don't want to pull the string across the string bed. Always push it down. And then when you bring it back down, kind of even it up and then pull. And so as you pull this here, you'll see that our knot ties, that self-tightening knot is going to get tighter so it can't pull through. And now I'm going to clamp off and I'm going to start. Make sure that you come back underneath the right way. And so you got to check periodically. It's better to check periodically if you got your pattern right and you're weaving them correctly. If you do that, as opposed to just, again, going really fast and then screwing the whole thing up and having to start over again. All right, so I've done the first 3 crosses on here. And then what I like to do to help make sure that I'm getting the racket back into shape, this looks pretty good, but I typically, you can see on my tension, I bumped it up 1.5 pounds. I'm not gonna go crazy. Now, I will admit, depending on, if you've noticed that your racket has really been pulled in is really out of round, you can save it by bumping that up a little bit more. I wouldn't recommend going more than 3 or 4 pounds tighter than the mains, because then your mains, the tension, you won't be able to gauge what your tension is. But you typically want to bump your crosses up a pound or maybe a pound and a half, maybe 2 pounds, depending, to make sure that you're putting, because as you pull it, the mains in, that racket's going to compress. Now when you put your crosses in, it's going to squeeze it back out, and that's going to help get that racket into the right shape. With these side braces, that helps reduce it. With a 6-point mount, that helps reduce it. If you only got a 2-point mount, then you may be in that situation where you need to get that racket back into shape, get that round out. So I've bumped it up just about a pound and a half there, and now I'm going to continue on with the rest of the crosses. All right, so I've skipped ahead here. I got past the side braces. So one technique some people do is they always are weaving one ahead of the one they're pulling. So what that does then is it allows me to pull the string through, and now because this string is in here, I can take the loop and I can weave it through a lot easier than if it was the leading one. Okay, so if I'm just pulling, and then it's going to be real tight, but where this one, it kind of gives a little bit of a buffer. It makes it easier to go underneath. So you can do that. And so then after you weave that one, so what you're going to do is now you're going to tension. Make sure too that you're always straightening the crosses. It's very important, because that's going to give you a better tension. It's going to give you more accurate tension. If that string is bowed through there, then it's longer than it needs to be. And if it's longer than it needs to be, then it's not as tight as it could be. So if I've got this string and they're bowed like this, then, if that string's really bowed, it can't, you're not going to get the full tension. Make sure you're pushing those crosses back. You want them to be as straight as possible when you're done. You don't want to do it after you've strung the racket. I see it all the time. People put in the crosses and the strings are all bowed, and then they try to straighten them out. Well, if you do it, it's too late. You're losing tension, so it's not going to be accurate. So make sure as you're stringing, you're straightening those out. And so now, after I've tensioned that one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep going. And so that way, I've got one to weave here. And I'm going to keep that one ahead the whole time there. So, and it depends, again, if you're more comfortable just kind of weaving, that's fine. If you like using the loop, that's fine too. Whatever works for you. Again, it's not about speed unless you're commercially stringing, but get it done accurately. I'm going to skip ahead here. I'm going to catch back up with you guys here after I get a few more done. All right, so one thing you may notice here is I still have the extra from where we tied off the beginning of the crosses. So one thing that I like to do, I think is a good tip, especially if you're beginning, is to leave that, don't cut it off. Because if for some reason something happens and you need to start over again, if you've cut it all the way down here, it's super hard to get it untied. With this long mount, I can untie that knot. If I unstring all the crosses, I can still untie it, and I have my original length of string that I was going to use for the crosses. And so in case of an emergency, I maybe can be able to salvage this piece of string for this string job. The other thing that I recommend too, if you're just starting out, is before you tie the final cross, double check the pattern. Make sure that you don't have a misweave anywhere, because I've seen it a lot of times. The last 2 crosses are miswoven, or there's one in the middle. If you don't tie this off, you can walk your clamps back, fix the mistake, and then string it back, and you can save the string job. It's not good to say you're stringing somebody else's racket and you hand it to them, and then there's a misweave in the middle, and then at that point the only thing you can do is cut them out, and you've just wasted a set of strings. So check before you tie the final cross off, and then if everything looks good, then tie it off. So the thing that I like to do is, if I've got a lot of extra, I'm going to cut it just a little bit shorter so it's a little easier to work with around. So again, on this knot, it's coming out of the string. Trying to get you guys a good view here. So it's coming out of the string. I'm gonna go down on the other side. Up on the first side. Sometimes it gets a little tight in here. And through. And again, I'm gonna kind of pull that, and it's gonna leave me this loop. And as I come through, I'm gonna have that little loop there over to the side. Now I'm gonna go back down. So most people on a double hitch, you just go ahead and pull that loop all the way tight, where I'm leaving a little bit of a loop there. So that's really the biggest difference. So now I'm gonna go back down on the other side and up through that first loop. And again, if you've done it right, when I pull, it's gonna tighten that loop. It's gonna tighten that little loop down. And now this loop will tighten down when I pull the string. I'm gonna unclamp. I'm gonna cut just slightly below the frame. Loosen the side braces. And I'm gonna loosen. And then we're done. And so that's the basic way on how to string a tennis racket, and that's using a two-piece stringing pattern. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below, or you can email Dodson at HammerItTennis.com. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks, guys.